What if I told you that the job you have today, the career path you've chosen, even the way society values your work, might have been decided centuries ago by a system you've never even heard of? Picture a time when your family name didn't just suggest your profession, it demanded it. When moving up in the world wasn't about talent or hard work, but about being born into the right circle, with the right connections, in the right place. This wasn't some distant fantasy or fictional dystopia. This was the reality for millions of people across medieval Europe, shaped by powerful organizations known as guilds. And what's truly astonishing is that their influence never really went away. We often think of history as something that happened long ago, something we've moved beyond, but the truth is, the past has a way of lingering in the structures we take for granted. The way we hire, the way we promote, the invisible lines that separate one profession from another, the unspoken rules about who belongs where, so much of this can be traced back to the guild system. These weren't just trade associations. They were economic, social, and political forces that carved society into layers that, in many ways, never fully disappeared. They created what we might call invisible castes, categories of people defined not by law, but by custom, access, and expectation. In this video, we're going to unravel how these medieval institutions built walls around professions that still stand today, sometimes in plain sight, often hidden just beneath the surface. We'll travel from the workshops of 12th century artisans to the high-rise offices of today, following a thread that connects guild masters to corporate executives, apprentices to unpaid interns, and journeymen to gig economy workers. You'll come away seeing the modern professional world in a completely new light, understanding not just how things are, but why they are that way. So get ready, because history is about to change the way you see your future. To truly grasp how these invisible castes formed, we need to step into the bustling, rapidly changing world of the 11th and 12th centuries. Europe was awakening from a long period of relative isolation. Populations were growing, new lands were being cultivated, and perhaps most importantly, trade routes were stretching further than they had in centuries, connecting distant markets and creating new wealth. This surge in commerce sparked a renaissance in urban life. Towns, which had often been little more than administrative or religious centers, began to thrive as hubs of production and exchange. It was in this fertile ground of opportunity and competition that the first guilds took root. Imagine a crowded medieval street. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes from one workshop, while the earthy scent of tanning leather wafts from another. A weaver sits by his window, carefully working a loom. These artisans were the engine of the town's economy, but they faced immense challenges. How could a single, honest carpenter compete with a dishonest one using cheaper, inferior wood? How could a skilled silversmith ensure his intricate designs weren't copied and sold by an untrained outsider? The solution was to band together. Craftsmen and merchants of the same trade began forming associations, guilds, as a way to protect themselves. Their primary goals were straightforward: to guarantee a standard of quality for their goods, to control competition by limiting who could practice the trade in their town, and to establish stable, fair prices. This wasn't just about making a profit, it was about creating a predictable and secure livelihood in an unpredictable world. But these guilds quickly evolved into something far more powerful than simple trade unions. They became the bedrock of social and political life in medieval towns. Membership in a guild provided a profound sense of identity and belonging. Guilds often adopted patron saints, organized lavish festivals and religious processions, and even provided a form of social security for their members. If a master craftsman fell ill or died, the guild would support his family. They ensured that widows and orphans were cared for, creating a safety net that the town itself did not provide. This fostered incredible loyalty and a strong, in-group mentality. You weren't just a baker, you were a member of the Bakers' Guild with all the privileges and responsibilities that came with it. This sense of community was powerful, but its benefits were exclusively reserved for those on the inside, deliberately excluding everyone else. Politically, guilds grew into formidable forces. As their economic power increased, they began to demand a voice in how their towns were run. They lobbied local lords or town councils for exclusive rights to produce and sell certain goods, effectively granting themselves legal monopolies. A non-guild member, no matter how skilled, could be fined or even banished for trying to sell their wares within the town walls. This control allowed guilds to do more than just regulate commerce. They began to shape the very fabric of urban society, influencing laws and civic priorities to serve their members' interests. They became a government within a government, wielding power that extended far beyond the workshop. Most crucially, guilds mastered the art of controlling knowledge. The skills of a trade were not written in books or taught in open schools. They were closely guarded secrets, passed down through a rigid system of training from master to apprentice. By monopolizing this knowledge, the techniques, the recipes, the patterns, the guilds created a closed system. Entry was not based on raw talent or ambition alone. It was restricted by long years of unpaid labor, costly fees, and the need for a master to sponsor you. This system ensured that power and proficiency remained within a small, select group, often passed from father to son. It was this foundational principle of exclusivity, this deliberate creation of insiders and outsiders, that established the blueprint for the professional castes we still navigate today. The walls they built centuries ago, though now invisible, still guide the paths of our careers. Within the walls of a medieval workshop, this rigid social order came to life, a microcosm of the feudal world outside. At the very top of this pyramid stood the master craftsman. He was far more than just a skilled worker. He was a business owner, a community leader, and a political figure. His workshop was his kingdom, and his authority within it was absolute. To become a master was the ultimate goal, but it was a status fiercely protected and incredibly difficult to achieve. It required not just exceptional skill, but also the creation of a masterpiece, a final, flawless piece of work judged by the existing masters of the guild. Even if your work was perfect, you still needed significant capital to open your own shop, buy raw materials, and pay any workers. This meant that wealth, family connections, and the approval of the existing elite were just as important as talent, creating a system where power and privilege tended to stay within the same families, generation after generation. Beneath the masters were the journeymen, a title derived from the French word journée, meaning a day's work. These were men who had successfully completed their long years of apprenticeship but had not yet ascended to the rank of master. They were highly skilled laborers paid by the day or the project for their work. The term journeyman is often romanticized, bringing to images of skilled workers traveling the countryside with their tools, gaining a wide range of experience in different towns. In reality, this travel was often a necessity, not a choice, with master status so difficult to obtain and many guilds limiting the number of new masters to prevent competition. Many journeymen found themselves permanently stuck in this transitional phase. They had the skills but not the rights, the labor but not the ownership. They were in a state of professional limbo, forever working for someone else's profit without a clear path to achieving their own. At the foundation of this entire structure, bearing its immense weight, were the apprentices. These were usually boys in their early teens, signed into a legal contract by their parents, binding them to a master for a term that could last anywhere from 7 to 14 years. In exchange for their labor, they received no wages, only basic room and board and the promise of training. Their lives were strictly controlled. They were forbidden from marrying, gambling, or visiting taverns, and their daily existence was a grueling cycle of menial chores and gradual skill acquisition. The master was not just an employer but a legal guardian, responsible for their moral and practical education. While a fortunate apprentice might be treated like a son and inherit the business, many others faced years of exploitation with no guarantee of advancement. Their future depended entirely on the master's goodwill and their own family's ability to eventually support them in opening a workshop. This three-tiered system was anything but a meritocracy. While skill was necessary, it was rarely sufficient for climbing the ladder. Becoming a master almost always required being born into the right family or having a father who could pay the exorbitant entry fees and furnish a workshop. Guilds often operated like exclusive clubs, favoring the sons and sons-in-law of existing members. This created self-perpetuating professional dynasties where the family trade was quite literal. The invisible walls between apprentice, journeyman, and master were built on a foundation of social and economic privilege, making the hierarchy as much a caste system as a career path. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of this medieval structure in the modern professional world. The unpaid intern fetching coffee and doing grunt work while hoping for a full-time offer is the direct descendant of the apprentice. The highly skilled contractor or gig economy worker, moving from project to project with no job security or benefits, lives a life strikingly similar to that of the journeyman. And the corporate partner or tenured executive who holds the keys to the kingdom, sets the standards and reaps the greatest rewards, embodies the same ultimate authority as the guild master. The titles have changed, but the underlying architecture of power, access, and exclusion remains deeply familiar, a ghost of the guild system still shaping our working lives centuries later. This careful control over who entered a trade began with the apprenticeship, a system that was far more than just a training program. It was the ultimate tool for gatekeeping. Imagine a young boy, perhaps only 12 or 13 years old, whose parents signed a binding legal contract, handing over his labor for the next 7 to 14 years of his life. In exchange for this immense commitment, he would receive no wages, only the most basic room and board, and the promise of instruction. His days were not his own. He was subject to the absolute authority of the master, who acted as a surrogate parent with the power to dictate everything from his morals to his daily chores. The first years were often spent on the most mundane tasks: sweeping the workshop, stoking the forge, running errands. The actual secrets of the craft were doled out slowly, painstakingly, only after this long period of proven loyalty and subservience. This wasn't just about learning a skill. It was a test of endurance and a barrier designed to be insurmountable for many. The true genius and the true injustice of this system was how it locked away knowledge. In an age before widespread literacy or public education, the techniques of a master goldsmith, a skilled armorer, or a fine cabinet maker were priceless commodities. These methods were not written down in manuals available to the public. They were guarded trade secrets, passed verbally and through hands-on demonstration from one generation of masters to the next, almost like a sacred ritual. An apprentice might spend years simply observing before being trusted to practice a single, crucial technique himself. This ensured that the mystery of the craft, a term guilds actually used, remained just that, a mystery to anyone outside the inner circle. By making the transmission of knowledge so personal, so slow, and so exclusive, the guilds guaranteed their techniques couldn't be easily stolen or replicated by outsiders. They created a monopoly on know-how, and who was deemed worthy of receiving this precious knowledge. Overwhelmingly, it was those who already had a foot in the door. Masters showed a powerful preference for taking on apprentices who were their own sons, nephews, or the children of other guild members. This wasn't just nepotism. It was a calculated strategy to keep wealth and influence within a tight-knit network of families. If you were the son of a master tailor, your path was clear. But if you were the son of a peasant farmer or a common laborer, the doors to these skilled, respectable, and profitable trades were effectively barred shut. The initial costs alone were prohibitive. A family often had to pay a substantial fee to the master just to secure an apprenticeship spot, not to mention providing their sons clothing and upkeep for years without the benefit of his potential earnings. This created self-perpetuating professional dynasties where the right to work became a form of inherited property, solidifying an invisible caste system based entirely on birth and connections, not merit or potential. The echoes of this centuries-old gatekeeping mechanism are startlingly clear in our modern professional landscape. Consider the unpaid internship, a now common rite of passage in industries like media, politics, and fashion. Just like the medieval apprentice, the modern intern is expected to work for little to no pay, often performing menial tasks with the hope that it will lead to valuable connections and a permanent position. And just like in the Middle Ages, this system inherently favors those who can afford it, young adults from wealthier families who can subsidize their living costs in expensive cities while they work for free. It becomes a filter that screens out talent based on economic background, not ability. The same principle applies to the soaring costs of professional certifications and advanced degrees. Becoming a lawyer, a doctor, or an architect requires not just intelligence and dedication, but a significant financial investment that can leave many buried in debt or unable to even start the process. These modern-day masterpieces are the bar exams, medical licenses, and accredited degrees that act as our formal gatekeepers, and while they ensure a standard of quality, they also replicate the old guild barriers of cost and access. Furthermore, the informal network-based hiring, where jobs are so often filled through personal referrals and, who you know, is the direct descendant of the guild master's preference for his own kin. It's the modern old boys club, a system that perpetuates privilege and creates invisible castes every bit as powerful as those forged in the medieval workshop, proving that the architecture of exclusion can be rebuilt in every era with new materials. But the power of the guilds extended far beyond the workshop walls and into the very heart of community life. They were not merely economic cooperatives, they were the social fabric of the medieval town, weaving together the lives of their members in a tight, interdependent web. Picture the annual Guild Festival, a spectacle of pride and piety that would bring the entire city to a standstill. Members would march through the streets in matching livery, their finest work displayed on floats, celebrating their patron saint with feasts and pageantry that reinforced their collective identity. For the families within the guild, this was more than a party. It was a powerful display of unity and status, a constant reminder to everyone else in town of who belonged to this privileged inner circle and who remained outside. This sense of brotherhood translated into a remarkably advanced, if exclusive, welfare system. Long before the concept of state-sponsored social security, guilds provided a safety net for their own. If a master craftsman fell ill and could not work, the guild's common fund would provide for his family's needs. If he passed away, the guild would often pay for his funeral and ensure his widow received a pension, sometimes even helping to apprentice his sons to continue the family trade. This was a profound source of security in a world riddled with uncertainty, fostering immense loyalty and a powerful sense of obligation among members. However, this charity had a very clear boundary. It stopped at the edge of the guild. This generous support system was exclusively for members, deliberately reinforcing the distinction between the protected insiders and the vulnerable outsiders who had to face life's hardships alone, further deepening the social divide. Politically, guilds were forces to be reckoned with, effectively acting as some of the earliest and most powerful lobbying groups in history. As their economic clout grew, they demanded and received a seat at the table of urban governance. Guild masters often secured positions on town councils where they could directly influence the laws and regulations that affected their trades. They successfully lobbied for tariffs on imported goods that might compete with their products, enforced rules that barred non-guild craftsmen from selling in the market, and essentially shaped local economic policy to protect their monopolies. This fusion of economic interest with political power allowed them to legislate their advantages into permanence, using the force of law to cement the invisible caste system they had built. This historical blending of economic, social, and political power finds its clear echo in our modern world. Today's professional associations and licensing boards, which control who can call themselves an architect or a financial advisor, function with a similar gatekeeping authority. Labor unions fight tirelessly for better wages and conditions for their members, just as guilds did, but historically, some have also struggled with internal exclusion, creating hierarchies based on seniority that can feel just as rigid. And the modern lobbying firm in a capital city, advocating for tax breaks or favorable regulations for a specific industry, is performing the same essential function as the guild masters who petitioned their medieval town council, protecting the interests of a defined in-group, often at the expense of broader competition. The players and the setting have changed, but the fundamental game of using collective power to shape the rules for a select few remains strikingly familiar. While this focus on quality brought undeniable benefits to medieval consumers, it also provided the perfect moral justification for shutting out competition. Guilds didn't just set the bar, they controlled who was even allowed to approach it. In city after city, they secured legal monopolies from local governments, making it outright illegal for anyone who wasn't a guild member to produce or sell goods within the town walls. A woman with incredible natural talent for weaving, or a traveling craftsman with innovative techniques learned abroad, would be fined, have their goods confiscated, or even face banishment if they tried to practice their trade. The guild's argument was always the same: without their oversight, quality would plummet and consumers would be cheated. This public-facing rationale masked a far more selfish motive: the elimination of any threat to their economic dominance. This is where the guilds mastered a powerful form of early public relations. They weaponized reputation. They worked tirelessly to create a powerful association in the public mind between their official guild seal and the very concepts of trust, safety, and competence. A loaf of bread with the baker's guild mark was guaranteed to be of proper weight and free of fillers. A piece of cloth from the weaver's guild was assured to be of consistent quality. But this also meant deliberately fostering the opposite perception of outsiders. Non-guild workers were publicly labeled as unskilled, dishonest, and dangerous. They were called bunglers or cobblers, terms dripping with contempt meant to suggest their work was shoddy and unreliable. This narrative wasn't just about business. It was about creating a social stigma that made buying from an outsider a foolish or even shameful act, effectively building a cultural moat around their professional castle. The result was the creation of a powerful invisible caste system where legitimacy itself was for sale, and the price was guild membership. Your skill alone was not enough to be considered a real craftsman. You needed the official stamp of approval from the right group. This system didn't just ask consumers to trust a product, it asked them to trust a hierarchy. It taught society to equate authority with quality and to view independence with suspicion, a lesson that has proven incredibly durable. The guilds successfully made themselves the sole arbiters of value, creating a world where your professional identity and your right to work were not determined by your own abilities, but by your membership in an exclusive club. Fast forward to today, and this very same playbook is still in use, though the uniforms have changed. Modern professional licensing requirements often serve an identical dual purpose. State bar associations ensure lawyers are qualified, but they also control the supply of lawyers by administering difficult exams and charging high licensing fees, protecting the earning potential of those already inside. Medical boards safeguard patient health, but the incredibly costly and lengthy path to becoming a doctor effectively limits the profession to those who can afford the decades of training, much like the expensive apprenticeship of old. Even outside of formal licenses, we see this dynamic in the power of brand names and elite certifications. A designer handbag or a software certification from a top company carries a weight far beyond the physical item or the actual knowledge tested. It carries the legitimacy of the guild that issued it. We are still living in a world where the right to be seen as competent, trustworthy, and legitimate is often granted not by our own hands, but by the seal of approval from a modern-day guild. Yet for all their power and influence, the world of the medieval guild was a starkly divided one, and nowhere was this division more absolute than along the lines of gender. If you were a woman with a talent for craftsmanship or a head for business in the Middle Ages, the guild system presented not a ladder to climb, but a wall too high to scale. These institutions were, by design and by law, a man's world. Formal membership was almost exclusively reserved for men, creating a professional landscape where women were systematically pushed to the margins, their contributions often hidden from the official record and their potential deliberately stifled. This wasn't an oversight, it was a core feature of the system, one that would cast a long shadow over the value of work for centuries to come. A woman's role in a guild shop was typically confined to that of a supporting character. She might be the master's wife or daughter, managing the household that was attached to the workshop, keeping the accounts, or selling the finished goods at the market front. She provided the essential domestic labor that allowed the business to function, but her work was seen as an extension of her wifely duties, not as a skilled trade in its own right. Even if she possessed immense talent and had absorbed the secrets of the craft through a lifetime of proximity, the path to formal recognition was blocked. The title of master, with all its legal and economic privileges, was a status she could almost never achieve. Without that title, she could not open her own independent workshop, take on official apprentices, or have a vote in guild decisions. Her labor was indispensable, yet her authority was non-existent. There were, of course, exceptions that proved the rule, often emerging from tragedy. A master's widow, for instance, might be permitted to keep the workshop running after her husband's death in order to support herself and her children. This was known as the widow's courtesy, a temporary arrangement that allowed her to manage the business until she remarried, almost always to another guildsman, or until her son came of age to take over. But even in this role, she was rarely granted the full legal rights of a master. She was a caretaker, a placeholder keeping the seat warm until a man could resume control. Her continued operation of the business was tolerated out of necessity or charity, not accepted as a right, a subtle but powerful distinction that reinforced her provisional and secondary status. Consequently, women were funneled into a narrow range of trades that were either deemed appropriate for their gender or, just as importantly, were less lucrative and therefore less jealously guarded by the male-dominated guilds. Spinning wool into thread was overwhelmingly women's work, so essential to the textile industry yet so poorly paid and so completely unorganized that it was never deemed worthy of a powerful guild. Brewing ale was another common trade for women, known as brewsters or alewives, as it could be done within the home. But as brewing grew more profitable and commercialized, male brewers began to form guilds and push women out, systematically excluding them from the formal, profitable side of the business they had helped to create. This process created a clear and enduring professional caste system. Prestigious, well-paid, skilled trades like goldsmithing or masonry were masculine, while lower status, often lower paid, and less regulated work like spinning, midwifery, or ale selling was feminine. This historical gendering of professions is not a relic confined to history books. It is a living legacy that continues to shape our economy and our perceptions of value. Today, we see it in the persistent gender pay gap, where fields dominated by women, such as early childhood education or social work, are consistently undervalued and underfunded compared to fields dominated by men with similar educational requirements. We see it in the term soft skills, often applied to nurturing or communicative strength associated with femininity, subtly implying they are less rigorous or less valuable than technical, hard skills. The immense economic value of care work, raising children, tending to the elderly, managing a home remains largely invisible in our formal economic measurements, precisely because it was historically women's work, performed outside the guild system, and thus never accorded the respect or compensation of a real profession. The walls the guilds built centuries ago to keep women out now manifest as invisible barriers that continue to define, limit, and devalue the work that women do. Now let's consider how this system of local control shaped not just economies but identities. Your profession was not merely what you did for a living, it was who you were, and that identity was deeply rooted in the place you called home. To be a master cutler in the city of Sheffield, England, meant something specific and carried a weight that the same title would not hold in a different town. Sheffield's Cutlers Guild had painstakingly built a reputation for producing the finest knives and blades in Europe, a reputation that attached itself to every member. Your work was a reflection of your city's honor, and the city's honor, in turn, opened doors for your work. This created a powerful feedback loop where local identity and professional identity became completely fused. You weren't just a blacksmith, you were a Toledo blacksmith, renowned for steelworking techniques passed down through generations and fiercely protected by the local guild. This geographical branding was an early form of intellectual property, and it was guarded with the ferocity of a state secret. This fusion of place and profession erected significant barriers to mobility. Imagine a highly skilled glassblower from Venice, home to the most celebrated glassmakers in the world, deciding to move to Paris. His arrival would not be met with open arms. Even with his immense talent, he would likely find himself completely shut out of his trade. The Parisian Glassblowers Guild would view him not as a fellow artisan, but as a dangerous foreign competitor, a threat to their carefully controlled market. He would be barred from opening a shop, forbidden from selling his wares, and unable to legally take on apprentices. His only options would be to abandon his life's work entirely, practice his craft illegally at great personal risk, or hope to find a rare master willing to challenge the guild and sponsor him, a long and uncertain process. Your skills were not always portable currency. They were often valid only within the walls of the city that had issued them, trapping you in a geographical caste defined by your guild's jurisdiction. The modern world, for all its connectivity, still operates with these deeply ingrained geographical professional castes. We may not have formal guilds blocking city gates, but we have powerful informal networks and local licensing laws that serve much the same purpose. Think about the licensing requirements for professions like cosmetology or plumbing, which vary dramatically from state to state in the US. A licensed electrician from California cannot simply move to Florida and start working. They must navigate a new set of exams, fees, and bureaucratic hurdles, effectively having to prove their competence all over again to a new local authority. This creates a significant disincentive for skilled workers to relocate, locking them into their current job markets. Furthermore, the concept of industry hubs creates powerful modern-day geographical monopolies on opportunity. Aspiring to work in high finance, your path almost inevitably leads to the gravitational pull of Wall Street in New York, or its equivalents in London or Hong Kong. Dreaming of a career in technology, the ecosystem of Silicon Valley, with its concentration of venture capital, talent, and networking events, offers opportunities simply unavailable in most other places. While you can code from anywhere, access to the inner circles of power, funding, and innovation is still heavily concentrated. Your location dramatically shapes your professional network, your access to certain kinds of jobs, and the ceiling on your potential advancement. We have replaced the walled city with the company campus and the closed network, but the principle remains. Where you are born or choose to live can still predetermine the professional paths available to you, perpetuating an invisible caste system built not on laws but on geography and access. Yet for all their deep-rooted power, the guild system could not withstand the seismic shifts of the 18th and 19th centuries. A perfect storm of technological revolution, new economic philosophies, and sweeping social change began to tear down the very foundations upon which the guilds had been built. The catalyst for this transformation was the Industrial Revolution, a period of breathtaking innovation that fundamentally altered how goods were produced and who produced them. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the careful hand of the weaver at his loom were increasingly drowned out by the relentless, mechanical roar of the factory. These new temples of industry did not rely on a small number of highly skilled master artisans creating one unique item at a time. Instead, they operated on the principle of mass production, breaking complex tasks down into simple, repetitive motions that could be performed by unskilled laborers, often including women and children, for a fraction of the cost. The guild's entire raison d'etre, controlling a monopoly on skilled craftsmanship, was rendered almost obsolete overnight. A factory owner needed warm bodies to tend machines, not journeymen who had spent 7 years mastering a trade. This technological upheaval was fueled by a powerful new set of ideas percolating through intellectual circles. Thinkers like Adam Smith were championing the principles of liberal economics, arguing passionately for free trade, open competition, and the dismantling of the very monopolies and protectionist regulations that guilds had thrived upon. To these new capitalists, the guilds were antiquated, inefficient obstacles to progress, artificially inflating prices and stifling the natural flow of the market. Governments, eager to foster national economic growth and industrial might, began to listen. One by one, the legal charters that had granted guilds their exclusive rights were revoked. The walls that had protected their members for centuries were torn down by legislative decree, leaving them exposed to a vast, unregulated marketplace where the only rule was competition. It would be a mistake, however, to see this as a simple story of oppressive old systems giving way to a new era of pure freedom and opportunity. While the formal, legal barriers of the guild system were indeed dismantled, the underlying social architecture of exclusion and hierarchy proved remarkably resilient. It didn't vanish, it simply evolved, adapting to the new capitalist landscape. The old gatekeepers were gone, but new ones emerged to take their place, often wearing different disguises. The requirement for a formal guild membership was replaced by a new, equally formidable set of prerequisites: access to capital to start a business, a formal education to enter a profession, and the right social networks to secure advancement. A master craftsman's son might have once inherited his father's workshop. Now, a factory owner's son might inherit the factory itself, along with the wealth and social connections needed to attend a university and enter the emerging professional class of lawyers, doctors, and managers. This transition saw the guild system's caste-like structures morph into new institutional forms. Professional associations and licensing boards arose to take up the guild's mantle of setting standards and controlling entry into fields like medicine and law, often creating similar barriers through expensive exams and educational requirements. Trade unions organized to protect the interests of the new industrial working class, fighting for better wages and conditions, yet sometimes also creating their own internal hierarchies based on seniority that could limit opportunities for newcomers. And within the new corporate giants, a rigid hierarchy emerged that bore a striking resemblance to the old master-journeyman apprentice model, with executives at the top, salaried managers in the middle, and a vast pool of replaceable workers at the bottom. The journey from a guild-based society to a capitalist one was not a clean break with the past, but a metamorphosis. It demonstrates with stunning clarity that systems of privilege and exclusion are incredibly adaptable, finding new ways to perpetuate old inequalities long after their original forms have crumbled into history. So if the formal guilds are gone, what replaced their power to control who gets to work and who doesn't? Look no further than the framed diplomas on an office wall, the state license hanging in a shop window, or the professional certification listed on a LinkedIn profile. We live in the age of the credential, a world where your right to practice a trade, offer advice, or even call yourself an expert is often contingent on a piece of paper issued by a sanctioned authority. And while we tell ourselves this system exists purely for quality control and public safety, and to a large extent it does, it's impossible to ignore how perfectly it replicates the gatekeeping functions of the medieval guild. These modern institutions, from the American Medical Association to your state's bar association, have become our era's de facto guilds, wielding the power to include and exclude with a stamp of approval. Consider the path to becoming a doctor. It is, in its essence, a 21st century apprenticeship of staggering length and cost. After 4 years of an expensive undergraduate degree, there's 4 years of medical school, which can leave a student buried under a mountain of debt, often reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the journey is far from over. Next comes residency, 3 to 7 years of grueling, often poorly paid work under the strict supervision of established masters, senior doctors, where your every move is evaluated. Finally, you must pass a series of rigorous board examinations to be granted a license to practice independently. This entire, decades-long process is administered and controlled by professional boards comprised of existing doctors. The parallels to the guild system are breathtaking: the lengthy, costly training, the control by current masters over who joins their ranks, the final masterpiece in the form of board exams that determines your fate. The system undoubtedly produces highly competent physicians, but it also effectively ensures that the profession remains largely accessible only to those who can afford the immense upfront investment of time and money, recreating the same socioeconomic barriers that defined guild membership. This phenomenon, often called credentialism, now permeates far beyond the traditional licensed professions. It's the ever-increasing demand for a college degree for jobs that previously did not require one, a trend that automatically filters out capable candidates based on their educational pedigree rather than their actual ability to do the work. It's the explosion of specialized certifications in fields like IT, project management, and human resources, where a specific acronym after your name can be the difference between your resume being seen or discarded by an automated tracking system. These credentials act as a shorthand for employers, a quick way to sort the supposedly qualified from the unqualified. But just like the Guild seal of approval, this shorthand often tells us more about a person's access to resources and their ability to navigate a bureaucratic system than it does about their innate talent, work ethic, or practical skill. And herein lies the most profound legacy of the Guild system, the creation of a professional caste where legitimacy is conferred not by your hands or your mind, but by your credentials. In many high-status fields, the paper qualification has become more important than the proven ability to perform. A brilliant coder without a computer science degree may find doors closed to them, while a less talented but fully credentialed graduate waltzes right through. An incredibly talented therapist with years of successful practice might be barred from accepting insurance because they lack a specific, narrowly defined license. We have, in many ways, created a system that prioritizes the symbol of competence over the substance of it, because the symbol is so much easier to measure and control. This is the invisible caste system of the modern professional world, one where your value is predetermined by the badges you've collected from the right institutions, ensuring that the pathways to prestige and power, much like the workshops of old, remain carefully guarded and difficult to enter. The question of who you know has always mattered, but in today's professional world, it has become one of the most powerful and pervasive forces shaping career trajectories, a direct inheritance from the guild master's preference for his own kin. We've traded the formal apprenticeship contract for the informal coffee chat, the master's workshop for the corporate office, but the underlying mechanism remains strikingly familiar. Access to opportunity is still heavily mediated by personal connections. This isn't just about the occasional favor, it's about a systemic preference for the familiar, for those who already move within the same social and professional circles, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of privilege that often operates just beneath the surface of official hiring policies. This modern incarnation of the guilds in group preference manifests most clearly in the simple act of the employee referral. Many companies actively encourage their staff to recommend friends and former colleagues for open positions, often even offering cash bonuses for successful hires. On the surface, this seems like a smart strategy. A current employee can vouch for a candidate's character and work ethic, theoretically de-risking the hiring process. But this practice, while practical, has a powerful unintended consequence. It funnels opportunities toward people who are already connected to the industry, who move in the same social orbits as existing employees, and who likely share similar educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. The candidate from a less connected community, who may be equally or even more qualified, never even hears about the opening. Their resume enters a vast digital pile, while the referred candidate's application is fast-tracked to the hiring manager's desk. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's often just the path of least resistance, a natural human tendency to trust and favor those within our own networks. Yet its effect is to create a modern old boys club, not bound by formal oaths but by LinkedIn connections and alumni associations, that replicates the guild's exclusion of outsiders. The impact of this networking caste system is quantifiable and profound. Numerous studies in sociology and economics have shown that a staggering percentage of jobs, some estimates suggest well over half, and even higher in certain industries like finance and tech, are found through personal and professional networks rather than cold applications. This statistic alone reveals a fundamental truth about our labor market. Merit and preparation are necessary, but they are often not sufficient. Without that crucial inside connection, many talented individuals hit an invisible wall. This dynamic disproportionately disadvantages first-generation professionals, immigrants, and individuals from marginalized communities whose families and social circles may not include lawyers, executives, or venture capitalists. They are forced to play the game on hard mode, relying solely on their credentials to shout over a wall, while others are ushered in through a side door they didn't even know existed. The glass ceiling isn't just about gender or race. It's also about the transparent but impenetrable barrier of unfamiliarity, of not having the right hand to shake at the right moment. This system of networked advantage becomes most apparent at the highest echelons of power. Look at the boardrooms of major corporations, the partnerships in elite law firms, or the founding teams of well-funded startups. You will often see a pattern of shared educational backgrounds, a web of previous employment at the same handful of companies, and a commonality of experience that speaks to a deeply interconnected ecosystem. This isn't always an explicit conspiracy to exclude. Often, it's a matter of comfort and shared language. People naturally gravitate toward and promote those who remind them of themselves, who understand the same cultural references, and who navigated similar formative experiences. The result is a leadership caste that is often homogeneous in its thinking and insulated from outside perspectives, not because of a lack of talent elsewhere, but because the guild-like gates to entry are so effectively guarded by the unconscious biases of networks. The path to the top, much like the path to becoming a master craftsman, is still often a matter of who is willing to sponsor your journey. This constant search for the next piece of work, this life of perpetual motion from one temporary job to another, might feel like a uniquely modern phenomenon born from our digital age. But if you could step back in time and walk the roads of medieval Europe, you would meet a very familiar figure, the journeyman. After completing his long years of apprenticeship, a young craftsman wouldn't just automatically become a master and open his own shop. That privilege was reserved for the fortunate few with the right family connections and capital. For everyone else, the next phase of life was the journeyman years, derived from the French word for a day's work. These men, now skilled in their trade, were compelled to travel from town to town, offering their labor to different master workshops for short periods, a day or a week at a time. They carried their tools with them, lived in rented rooms or the master's attic, and were paid by the task. Their existence was fundamentally transitional and insecure. They had the skills but not the rights, the labor but not the ownership, forever working for someone else's profit without a clear, guaranteed path to achieving a stable workshop of their own. Now fast forward to today and observe the rise of the gig economy. A graphic designer refreshes a freelance job platform, hoping to snag a 2-week project designing a logo. A skilled mechanic using a mobile app accepts a request to change a customer's brake pads in their own driveway. A writer pitches article ideas to a dozen different online magazines, piecing together a living one assignment at a time. These modern workers are the digital era's journeymen. They possess valuable skills and are often highly trained, yet they operate in a professional space defined by its impermanence. They lack the foundational elements of traditional employment: a steady paycheck, health insurance, paid vacation, retirement contributions, or any legal protection against sudden termination. Their work life is a mosaic of temporary engagements, a constant hustle to line up the next gig before the current one ends, living with the ever-present anxiety of income volatility. They are, in essence, perpetually temporary, existing in a state of professional limbo. This system has effectively created a new, digital age invisible caste. These workers are essential to the smooth functioning of our modern economy, providing flexibility and on-demand services that millions rely on. Yet, they are systematically denied the stability, benefits and social status accorded to those with full membership in their professions, the salaried employees, the partners in firms, the tenured professionals. They are the outsiders, the contingent workforce. This caste is defined not by a formal legal category, but by a shared condition of precarity. They might be called independent contractors on paper, a label that sounds empowering but often serves to legally justify their exclusion from the safety nets and protections that surround traditional employment. Theirs is a caste built on a lack of security, a second-class professional status that is often invisible to those who benefit from their services, but all too real for those living it. The most profound parallel between the medieval journeyman and the modern gig worker lies in the broken promise of advancement. For the journeyman, the entire point of his travels was to eventually gather enough experience, money, and reputation to create his masterpiece and be welcomed into the guild as a full master. For many, this dream was never realized, leaving them stranded in a permanent state of journeyman status. Similarly, the gig economy is often sold as a stepping stone, a flexible way to build a portfolio, gain experience, and transition to more stable opportunities. And for some, it certainly is, but for a great many others, it becomes a trap. There is no clear promotion to master status within the gig model itself. A driver for a ride-sharing service, no matter how highly rated, does not get promoted to a salaried position with benefits within that company. A freelance programmer, despite years of successful projects, remains an outsider, always negotiating the next contract. The path to advancement doesn't exist within the system. It requires leaving the system altogether, a difficult leap that many cannot make. This lack of a horizon, of a visible future beyond the next temporary job, is what makes this modern caste so potent and so reminiscent of the professional limbo faced by those medieval craftsmen centuries ago. We love to tell ourselves a simple and comforting story about success, that in a fair world, talent combined with hard work is always enough to guarantee a rewarding career. This is the powerful myth of pure meritocracy, the idea that the professional world is a level playing field where the best and brightest naturally rise to the top. It's a narrative that places the entire burden of achievement and the entire blame for failure squarely on the individual. But the lingering ghost of the guild system whispers a more complicated truth, reminding us that perception, reputation, and public image have always been just as important as raw skill in determining who gets to be seen as legitimate and valuable. Long before we had resumes or online profiles, guilds were masters of professional branding. They understood that controlling the narrative around quality was just as crucial as controlling the quality itself. A guild's official mark, stamped onto a piece of cloth or etched into the base of a silver goblet, was more than just a signature. It was a powerful symbol of trust, a guarantee of excellence, and a sophisticated marketing tool that immediately separated the insider from the outsider. That mark told a customer they were buying from a recognized master, someone who had been vetted and approved by the established order. An independent craftsman, no matter how gifted, lacked that seal of approval. Without it, their work was viewed with suspicion, assumed to be inferior simply because it existed outside the official system. The guild's brand was the ultimate gatekeeper, determining value and legitimacy long before the product was ever examined. Today, we've simply digitized this ancient practice. The guild mark has been replaced by the optimized LinkedIn profile, the meticulously curated portfolio website, and the carefully crafted personal brand. We are constantly encouraged to think of ourselves as CEOs of our own personal companies, to market our skills, to network strategically, and to build a public image that signals competence and reliability. These tools can be incredibly empowering, allowing individuals to showcase their work to a global audience. but they also create a new kind of invisible caste system, one based on branding savvy rather than on guild membership. Success now depends not just on your ability to do the work, but on your ability to sell your ability to do the work. Two people can possess identical skills and dedication, but the one who understands personal branding, who knows how to algorithmically optimize their online presence, and who has the confidence to aggressively self-promote, will inevitably have access to far more opportunities. The other, perhaps equally or even more talented but less comfortable with this performative aspect of modern work, will be overlooked. Their merit is invisible because their branding is quiet. This relentless focus on image perpetuates the illusion of meritocracy by making inequality seem like a personal choice. When someone fails to advance, the meritocratic narrative suggests it must be due to a lack of talent or effort. But what if the real deficit was a lack of understanding about personal SEO, or an inability to afford a professional portfolio designer, or simply a personality that is less inclined toward self-promotion? The myth hides the fact that the rules of the game are not just about producing quality work, they are about performing a certain version of professional success that aligns with modern expectations. This performance favors those who are extroverted, who come from backgrounds where self-confidence is nurtured, and who have the cultural capital to understand the unspoken codes of professional presentation. The guild system's legacy teaches us that legitimacy has never been a simple matter of merit. It has always been a carefully constructed perception, and those who control the tools of perception control access to power and opportunity. This deep-seated division between the work of the hands and the work of the mind, a hierarchy meticulously constructed by the guilds, did not vanish with the advent of the modern world. It simply put on a new suit literally. The very terms we use today, blue collar and white collar, are a direct linguistic inheritance from this past, referring to the durable, often blue-dyed uniforms of manual laborers and the crisp, white dress shirts of office managers. But this is far more than a fashion distinction. It is a powerful social and economic caste system that continues to dictate worth, respect, and opportunity in ways that are both obvious and insidiously subtle. The guilds of the Middle Ages, for all their power, were fundamentally associations of manual craftsmen. The master mason, the guild smith, the master weaver. Their prestige was built upon tangible, physical skill. They created objects that could be seen, touched, and used. Yet, even within this world, a hierarchy of prestige existed. The goldsmith working with precious metals often held a higher social standing than the blacksmith working with iron, an early hint that the materials and the perceived delicacy of the work influenced its value. As economies grew more complex, a new class of professionals began to emerge: merchants, lawyers, bankers, and clerks. Their work was not primarily physical but intellectual and managerial, dealing with ledgers, contracts, and correspondence. They were the original white-collar workers, and they increasingly positioned themselves as a class above the manual artisans. They didn't get their hands dirty, and this physical cleanliness became a metaphor for a kind of social and intellectual superiority. This historical bias became fossilized in our modern economic structures. Today, we see this caste system play out in stark disparities in wages, benefits, and social respect. A highly skilled electrician or master plumber, who requires years of training and possesses knowledge essential to the functioning of our society, is often paid less and accorded less automatic respect than a mid-level manager in a corporate office, whose daily output might be a series of emails and spreadsheet updates. We have internalized the idea that managing the work of others is inherently more valuable than doing the work itself, that thinking is superior to making. This is a profound legacy of the guild era valuation that began to separate conception from execution, placing a higher premium on the former. The result is that vital trades now face critical shortages of new talent, as young people are funneled toward 4-year college degrees and away from vocational training, not necessarily due to interest or aptitude, but because of a powerful, invisible social pressure that deems one path prestigious and the other a last resort. Perhaps the most telling evidence of this enduring caste system is that it exists even within the seemingly privileged world of white-collar work itself. Not all intellectual labor is valued equally. Compare the societal standing and compensation of a corporate lawyer structuring a merger to that of a public defender ensuring a fair trial. Contrast the salary and prestige of a Wall Street investment banker with that of a public school teacher shaping young minds, a software engineer optimizing algorithms for social media engagement is often valued more highly than a civil engineer designing safe drinking water systems. The common thread: we consistently prize work that generates capital and serves private interests over work that serves the public good, nurtures communities, or upholds justice. These valuations are not natural or inevitable. They are the result of centuries of cultural prioritization, a lingering echo of which guilds held political power and shaped the narrative around what kind of skill constitutes a real profession. We have created a world where the term productive is almost exclusively applied to activities that generate immediate profit, while equally essential but less monetized work is relegated to a lower caste, deemed vocational or a calling to justify its lower pay. This invisible hierarchy has tangible, real-world consequences that extend far beyond individual paychecks. It shapes government policy, as professions with higher prestige wield more lobbying power and influence over legislation that affects their industries. It influences which careers are highlighted in media and pop culture, further reinforcing stereotypes about success and status. It even affects how we interact with one another socially. The question, "So, what do you do?" can instantly trigger a subconscious ranking, shaping first impressions based on a person's place in this professional caste system. To challenge this requires more than just adjusting wages. It requires a fundamental cultural shift in how we perceive value itself. It asks us to recognize that the skill of a welder is as complex and necessary as the skill of an accountant, that the care provided by a nurse is as critical to our society's functioning as the code written by a programmer. Dismantling this centuries-old stigma means finally severing the link between the cleanliness of one's collar and the true worth of one's work. Yet even as our world grows more connected than ever before, with digital networks spanning the globe and multinational corporations operating across continents, a surprising truth emerges: the local and the particular have not been erased. In fact, the very forces of globalization that promise a borderless professional world have, in many ways, reinforced the power of place, creating a new global landscape that still eerily echoes the old geographical monopolies of medieval guilds. We now have a planet where you can collaborate with a team in Bangalore from your laptop in Boston, but where actually moving your career across that same distance often means confronting a maze of localized barriers, unspoken rules, and cultural gatekeeping that would feel very familiar to a journeyman artisan trying to ply his trade in a foreign city 700 years ago. Consider the undeniable dominance certain nations hold over specific industries. If you are in the world of high fashion, your career's zenith is almost universally acknowledged to be in Paris or Milan. The automotive engineering world orbits around Stuttgart and Munich in Germany and Tokyo in Japan. For film and entertainment, the gravitational pull of Hollywood remains almost absolute. These are not just clusters of companies, they are entire ecosystems complete with their own unique professional languages, unspoken codes of conduct, and deeply ingrained expectations about how careers are built. To be an outsider trying to break into one of these hubs is to face a challenge far greater than simply being good at your job. You must first learn to navigate the local culture of work, a task that can be as daunting as a medieval craftsman learning the secret handshake of a foreign guild. The most visible of these modern guild walls are the formal certification systems and licensing requirements that vary wildly from country to country. A brilliant architect trained in Denmark with a deep understanding of sustainable design cannot simply move to Canada and start designing buildings. She must first navigate a complex and often costly process of having her credentials evaluated, potentially taking new exams, and proving her competence to a local licensing body, a body made up of and naturally biased toward the established local professionals. This system, while designed to protect public safety, also functions as a powerful filter, protecting the economic interests of the domestic guild of architects by limiting outside competition. It creates a professional caste defined by the origin of one's papers, where your passport can be as important as your portfolio, but the barriers are far more subtle than just paperwork. The true test often lies in mastering the invisible curriculum of local professional culture. In Japan, for instance, business communication is often highly contextual and indirect, valuing harmony and consensus. A straightforward, assertive American executive might be perceived as brash and uncooperative, their very strengths becoming liabilities in the new context. In many European countries, the line between professional and personal life is more rigidly guarded than in the always-on culture of a Silicon Valley startup. An employee's reluctance to answer emails after hours isn't a sign of laziness. It's adherence to a different, locally respected code of professional boundaries. These are the unwritten rules that are never taught in a certification course, the social nuances that separate the insider from the perpetual outsider. Failing to master them can leave a talented professional stranded on the periphery, never fully accepted or trusted, no matter their technical skill. This dynamic effectively creates a globalized version of the old invisible caste system, where your professional mobility and potential are still heavily influenced by your place of origin and your cultural fluency. A software developer from Eastern Europe might be hired for their exceptional talent, but then find themselves passed over for leadership roles in a California-based company because they lack the specific, casual social graces and network of their American-born colleagues. Their accent, their cultural references, their different approach to conflict, all these mark them as an outsider, preventing their full integration into the highest levels of the professional guild. The promise of a global meritocracy bumps up against the stubborn reality of local prejudice and comfort with the familiar. So while we can work together across oceans with ease, the pathways to true belonging and advancement in the global professional arena are still surprisingly narrow and localized. The guild system's legacy has not been dismantled by the internet. It has been digitized and internationalized. We have replaced the walled city with the fortified professional ecosystem, where the gates are guarded not by swords and laws, but by licensing boards, cultural norms, and the unconscious bias of networks that still prefer their own. The playing field is global, but it is far from level, proving that the human tendency to create insiders and outsiders can adapt to any scale, weaving ancient patterns of exclusion into the very fabric of our modern, interconnected world. And just as the master craftsman of old demanded years of unpaid labor from his apprentice, our modern system of higher education has erected a similarly imposing financial barrier. The soaring cost of tuition at elite universities functions as a direct parallel to the fees a medieval family had to pay to secure their son's spot in a workshop. A degree from a prestigious institution has become the new masterpiece, the essential ticket required for entry into the most powerful and lucrative professions. But this ticket comes at a staggering price, one that often requires students or their families to take on crippling debt, effectively mortgaging their future for the chance to compete. This system inherently favors those who can afford the upfront investment, creating a filter that screens for wealth and privilege long before it ever assesses talent or drive. The unpaid apprentice sweeping the workshop floor has been replaced by the indebted graduate, working for years to pay off loans instead of honing their craft, both systems ensuring that economic background, not just merit, is a primary determinant of professional destiny. The mechanisms of this modern gatekeeping extend far beyond simple tuition fees. Consider the powerful role of legacy admissions, a practice where universities give preferential treatment to applicants whose parents or grandparents are alumni. This is the academic world's version of the guildmaster favoring his own son, a formalized system of nepotism that reserves spots in the most exclusive institutions for those who are already part of the established dynasty. It's a policy that explicitly values bloodline over brilliance, reinforcing intergenerational privilege by ensuring that the children of the elite have a dramatically smoother path to the same coveted credentials. Furthermore, the profound geographic disparities in primary and secondary school funding, often tied to local property taxes, mean that the quality of a child's education from their very first day of school is heavily dependent on their zip code. A student from a well-funded suburban district enters the race for college admission with a significant head start, while a student from an underfunded urban or rural school, despite possessing equal intelligence and potential, is forced to overcome a deficit created by systemic inequality. These are not mere obstacles, they are the carefully constructed walls of the modern educational guild, designed to keep the number of qualified applicants manageable and to preserve the status quo. The result of this system is the creation of a powerful and pervasive invisible caste, one defined not by a title or a legal decree, but by the name of a university on a diploma. In many high-stakes fields like law, finance, and top-tier consulting, your educational pedigree is not just a nice bonus, it is the fundamental currency of credibility. A graduate from an Ivy League school or Oxbridge is immediately ushered into a network of recruiters and opportunities, their resume placed at the top of the pile based on the prestige of their institution alone. Meanwhile, an equally talented and hardworking graduate from a less famous state university or community college will find those same doors firmly closed, their actual skills and knowledge deemed insufficient simply because of the lack of a brand name stamp. This is the modern-day equivalent of the Guild's seal of approval, a signal to employers that this candidate comes from the right stock, has been vetted by the right masters, and understands the unspoken codes of the professional world. The focus shifts from what you can do to where you learn to do it, mirroring the Guild's historical preference for insiders who had been properly socialized within the system. This relentless emphasis on pedigree over potential has a chilling effect on social mobility, effectively freezing intergenerational privilege in place. When access to the best education is so clearly correlated with family wealth and connections, it becomes incredibly difficult for talent to rise from the bottom. The children of doctors and lawyers, who benefit from both the financial resources to pay for elite schools and the social capital to navigate the admissions process, are far more likely to become doctors and lawyers themselves. Conversely, the child of a factory worker or a retail clerk, no matter how brilliant, faces a gauntlet of financial barriers, bureaucratic complexity, and cultural unfamiliarity. They are the modern-day outsiders looking in at the walled garden of opportunity, much like the talented peasant craftsman barred from the guild hall centuries ago. The system claims to be a meritocracy, but it is one that is rigged at the starting line, ensuring that the winners are often those who began the race with the most advantages, perpetuating a professional caste system that is all the more powerful for its invisibility and its insistence that it is fair. This complex dual nature of labor unions is one of the most fascinating and contradictory legacies of the entire guild system. On the surface, the modern union seems like the ultimate antidote to the guild's exclusionary practices, a collective built not to keep people out, but to lift everyone up. And to a tremendous extent, that's exactly what they have achieved. For over a century, unions have been the most powerful force in the world for securing fair wages, safe working conditions, and dignity for the average worker. They fought for the 8-hour workday, for overtime pay, for health insurance and retirement pensions. They gave a collective voice to individuals who would otherwise be powerless against massive corporate entities, effectively breaking down the caste-like power dynamic between a single worker and a vast, impersonal employer. In this role, they are the heroic inheritors of the guild's collective spirit, but pointed toward inclusion and broad-based empowerment rather than restriction. Yet, if we look closer at the history of some labor movements, we find a more troubling pattern, one that uncomfortably mirrors the guild's original sin of exclusion. For decades, many powerful trade unions in the United States systematically excluded African American workers, women, and immigrants from membership. They used formal barriers like exclusionary clauses in their constitutions, and informal ones like requiring existing members to sponsor new applicants, a system that easily perpetuated racial and ethnic homogeneity. These practices weren't just minor oversights, they were deliberate strategies to artificially limit the supply of labor in certain skilled trades, thereby driving up wages for the privileged insiders. By closing their doors to marginalized groups, these unions didn't just reflect the prejudices of the broader society. They actively enforced a rigid professional caste system, ensuring that the most lucrative and stable skilled jobs remained the exclusive domain of white men. They became, in effect, the very thing they were supposedly created to fight, a gatekeeping institution that hoarded opportunity. Even within unions that are fully inclusive today, another guild-like structure often persists, the seniority system. While seniority provides a clear, objective way to determine promotions, layoffs, and desirable work assignments, preventing favoritism and rewarding loyalty, it can also create its own internal caste system. A newer, perhaps more dynamic and skilled worker may find their opportunities for advancement completely blocked by someone who has simply been there longer. This system prioritizes time served over talent or innovation, mirroring the guild's focus on the lengthy, time-based apprenticeship as the only path to mastery. It can create a rigid internal hierarchy where the masters with the most seniority enjoy the greatest benefits and security, while the journeymen and apprentices, the newer hires, must wait their turn regardless of their contribution or potential. This protects workers from arbitrary management decisions, but it can also stifle meritocracy and entrench a new kind of generational privilege within the workforce itself. This leaves us with a profound and complicated truth about the fight for workers' rights. The very tools of collective power that can dismantle one set of castes, the imbalance between capital and labor can, if not carefully guarded, be used to build new ones based on race, gender, or tenure. It shows that the form of an organization matters less than its intent and its vigilance. A union, like a guild, is ultimately a tool. It can be wielded to create a more equitable society or to protect the advantages of a narrow in-group. Recognizing this history is not about condemning the entire labor movement, but about understanding that the struggle for economic justice is never simple. It requires constant self-reflection and a commitment to ensuring that the fight for one group's fairness doesn't come at the expense of another's exclusion. The goal is to harness the collective power of the guild without inheriting its caste system, a delicate balancing act that remains one of the central challenges of modern work. This digital revolution carries with it the intoxicating promise of a true professional meritocracy, a world where the old guild walls finally crumble under the weight of open access and unlimited information. With a smartphone and an internet connection, anyone can theoretically learn to code from free courses offered by top universities, master graphic design through endless YouTube tutorials, or build a global client base as a freelance writer without ever leaving their home. Online platforms like GitHub and Stack Overflow have become the new town squares for collaborative problem solving, where your contributions are valued based on their technical merit, not your educational pedigree. Freelance marketplaces connect talent with opportunity across oceans and time zones, seemingly rendering geographical monopolies obsolete. These tools appear to be the ultimate dismantlers of the old caste system, creating a vibrant global bazaar where skill is the only currency that truly matters. Yet, for all its revolutionary potential, this new landscape is already developing its own subtle mechanisms of exclusion, proving that the architecture of privilege is remarkably adaptable. The first and most obvious barrier is the digital divide itself, a modern moat that separates the connected from the disconnected. This isn't just about having a device, it's about the quality of the connection, the reliability of the electricity, and the quiet, private space necessary for focused online learning or remote work. A student in a rural area with sluggish, unreliable internet cannot participate equally in a live coding bootcamp. An aspiring digital artist sharing a single computer with 3 siblings faces a practical hurdle that their wealthier counterpart does not. This technological gatekeeping recreates the old socioeconomic barriers of the guild system, where the cost of entry is no longer a master's fee but the price of high-speed internet, a powerful computer, and a conducive learning environment. Perhaps more insidious is the rise of algorithmic gatekeeping, a form of exclusion that is both invisible and incredibly powerful. On freelance platforms, your visibility and success are often determined by complex algorithms that prioritize profiles based on ratings, completion rates, and keyword optimization. A new worker, despite being highly skilled, can be buried on the 10th page of search results, invisible to potential clients, trapped in a digital form of journeyman status with no clear path to mastery. Hiring software used by large corporations now routinely scans resumes for keywords from specific universities or previous companies, automatically filtering out candidates who may have gained their skills through alternative, non-traditional paths. This automated bias systematically privileges those who already fit a certain mold, effectively codifying the old biases of the guild masters into lines of code. The algorithm becomes the new gatekeeper, and its logic is often a black box, making the exclusion feel impersonal and therefore even more difficult to challenge. Furthermore, the very concentration of power in the hands of a few tech giants creates a new kind of guild hall, one with a Silicon Valley zip code. The rules of the major platforms, the App Store, Google Search, Amazon's Marketplace are set by a small, homogeneous group of individuals whose decisions can make or break entire professions. An app developer's livelihood depends on Apple's approval. A content creator's income hinges on the ever-changing whims of the YouTube algorithm. This centralization of power means that while the tools for production have been democratized, the pathways to distribution and monetization are often controlled by new, even more powerful intermediaries. These modern guilds don't control the skill itself, but they absolutely control the market for it, and they can change the rules of that market overnight, leaving thousands of digital craftspeople scrambling to adapt. This duality shows that technology is not inherently a force for liberation or oppression. It is a mirror, reflecting and often amplifying the existing structures of society. It can tear down the old walls of exclusion only to build new, more sophisticated ones in their place. The gig economy platform can liberate a worker from a stifling office job, but it can also trap them in a precarious cycle of algorithmic management and financial instability, a digital echo of the journeyman's rootless existence. An online learning platform can provide world-class education to millions, but its certification may carry less weight with a traditional employer than a degree from a prestigious university, reinforcing the very credentialism it seeks to overcome. The lesson from the guilds is that every system, no matter how open it seems, will develop its own criteria for inclusion and exclusion. The challenge of our time is not to naively believe technology will erase these castes, but to consciously shape these new tools to ensure they foster genuine equity, constantly questioning who is being included, who is being left behind, and who ultimately holds the keys to the digital kingdom. But the true power of these invisible castes lies not in their ability to shape our opportunities, but in their power to shape our very minds. The economic barriers and social stigmas are formidable enough, but their most insidious effect is psychological, worming their way into our sense of self and quietly dictating the boundaries of our own ambition. For centuries, the guild system didn't just control who could be a carpenter. It broadcast a relentless message about what it meant to be a carpenter, who was worthy of that title, and where that role stood in the grand hierarchy of society. We have internalized these centuries-old valuations, and they now operate as a silent, internal script that can limit our potential before we ever encounter an external barrier. This process begins almost from birth, as we unconsciously absorb societal cues about the value and appropriateness of different paths. A young girl who expresses an interest in engineering might be gently steered toward toys and activities deemed more suitable, not through any malicious intent, but because of deeply ingrained cultural assumptions about gender and profession that have their roots in the guild's exclusion of women. A child from a working-class family might never seriously consider a career in art or architecture, not because they lack talent, but because those fields are subconsciously categorized in their household and community as not for people like us. These are not conscious decisions. They are the quiet, background hum of a caste system that teaches us our place long before we are old enough to choose one for ourselves. It narrows our field of vision, causing us to rule out entire avenues of possibility without ever seriously investigating them, simply because they feel alien, unreachable, or somehow wrong for someone of our background. For those who do manage to break through and enter a field where they are statistical outliers, the psychological toll often manifests as imposter syndrome, that persistent, gnawing feeling of being a fraud, of not truly belonging, and of waiting to be exposed. This isn't a personal failing or a sign of weakness. It is a perfectly rational response to navigating a professional world whose hidden rules were not written with you in mind. When you are the first in your family to become a lawyer, or one of the few women on a construction site, or a person of color in a predominantly white corporate office, you lack the inherited cultural capital that others take for granted. The casual references, the unspoken norms of behavior, the informal networks, all of these can feel like a foreign language, reinforcing the sensation that you are an outsider who has slipped in by accident. This anxiety can be paralyzing, leading to overwork in a desperate attempt to prove worthiness, or to a reluctance to speak up and claim authority, forever hampering confidence and advancement. On the other end of the spectrum lies a different psychological outcome: quiet resignation. If imposter syndrome is the anxiety of being inside but feeling out of place, resignation is the defeated acceptance of being permanently on the outside. It's the decision not to apply for the promotion, not to pursue the dream career, not to even entertain the thought of switching fields, because the invisible walls feel too high and too solid to scale. This isn't always a dramatic moment of giving up. More often, it's a slow, steady erosion of ambition, a gradual shrinking of one's own horizons to fit the space that society has historically allotted. It is a form of self-policing where the individual internalizes the limits of the caste system and enforces them upon themselves, saving the world the trouble. The economic cost of this collective resignation is incalculable: the lost innovations, the stifled creativity, the potential geniuses who never tried. But the human cost is even greater: a life lived within confines that were built centuries ago by people who never could have imagined you. To see the guild system's legacy in its most polished and powerful form, look no further than the modern legal profession. This is a world where the ancient mechanisms of control, exclusion, and pedigree have been refined into a sophisticated and highly respected caste system. The journey begins the moment an aspiring lawyer decides to practice, and they immediately encounter the direct descendant of the medieval guild, the State Bar Association. This body holds the ultimate authority, the exclusive right to grant the license to practice law. To earn this license, one must not only complete a costly and lengthy formal education, but also pass a character and fitness evaluation and survive the gauntlet of the bar exam itself. This entire process, while framed as a necessary safeguard for public protection, functions with the same gatekeeping logic as the guilds of old. It controls the supply of practitioners, maintains a monopoly on the delivery of legal services, and legitimizes only those who have been vetted and approved by the existing masters of the craft. The bar exam is the modern-day masterpiece, a final trial that determines if you are worthy to join the professional fold. But passing the bar is merely the first hurdle, the equivalent of becoming a journeyman in the medieval system. True mastery and access to the highest echelons of the profession are governed by an even more exclusive set of rules, centered almost entirely on educational pedigree. The most prestigious and powerful law firms, those that handle billion-dollar mergers and argue before the Supreme Court, operate with a hiring focus so narrow it would make a medieval guild master nod in recognition. Their recruitment pipelines are laser-targeted at a tiny handful of elite law schools, the Ivy League, and a few other top-tier institutions. A graduate from a less prestigious law school, even if they graduated at the top of their class and possess brilliant legal acumen, will find the doors to these firms all but welded shut. Your law school diploma is not just a certificate of education, it is your permanent professional caste mark, a brand that signals to the entire industry where you belong in the hierarchy. This obsession with pedigree is a perfect example of the guild's preference for insiders, ensuring that new entrants come from a familiar and socially sanctioned background. Once inside these elite firms, the guild-like structure continues to dictate a lawyer's path. The modern law firm partnership model is a near-perfect replica of the master-journeyman-apprentice hierarchy. New associates are the apprentices burdened with years of grueling, often thankless work, poring over documents for hundreds of hours, conducting tedious research, and doing the bidding of their superiors, all in the hope of one day proving their worth. After nearly a decade of this proving ground, a select few may be invited to become partners, the modern equivalents of master craftsmen. They gain an ownership stake in the business, a share of the profits, and a voice in the firm's governance. But this promotion is not a guarantee. It is a ritualized selection process where factors like client connections, perceived loyalty, and cultural fit are just as important as legal skill. Those who are not chosen are effectively cast out from this particular guild hall, forced to find their way elsewhere, their dream of mastery within that firm permanently extinguished. The culture within these institutions further reinforces the invisible caste. It is a culture that often implicitly favors a specific background, one that can afford the unpaid internships that bolster a resume, that understands the unspoken codes of professional dress and conversation, and that has the financial safety net to survive the low pay of early public interest work that leads to prestigious clerkships. This creates a homogeneous environment where success is not just about how well you argue a motion, but about how comfortably you fit into a pre-existing mold. It is a system that can systematically disadvantage first-generation lawyers or those from less affluent backgrounds, not through any overt discrimination, but through 1,000 tiny cultural cues that signal they are outsiders. The result is a profession that, despite its rhetoric of meritocracy, perpetuates inequality by filtering for a very specific type of person long before their legal talent is ever truly tested. The law may be blind, but the legal profession most certainly is not, and its gaze is often fixed firmly on the privileges of the past. Nowhere is the clash between modern myth and ancient reality more striking than in the world of technology, an industry that proudly wears the banner of meritocracy. We're told it's a pure marketplace of ideas, where a brilliant algorithm written in a garage can topple a giant, and where hoodies and flip-flops have replaced the suit and tie as the uniform of success. It's a compelling narrative of disruption and boundless opportunity, a world supposedly built on code alone where your background doesn't matter, only your ability to execute. But if you pull back the curtain on this high-tech stage, you begin to see a very different, much older play being performed, with a cast of characters and a plotline that would feel deeply familiar to a medieval guild master. The first clue lies in the hiring practices of the most elite tech companies. While they claim to seek only the best and brightest, their recruitment engines are finely tuned to harvest talent from a very specific set of fields: the computer science departments of prestigious universities like Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon. A degree from one of these institutions acts as a modern-day guild seal, a near guarantee that your resume will be seen by a human rather than filtered out by an algorithm. This creates an immediate, powerful bias. It means that a self-taught coding prodigy from a small town, or a brilliant developer who learned their craft through a community college program, is often automatically relegated to a lower caste, their potential invisible behind the lack of a brand name credential. The industry's supposed focus on skill is, in its initial filters, actually a focus on pedigree, replicating the guild's age-old preference for those who have been trained and vetted by the right masters in the right institutions. This filtering continues through the powerful mechanism of employee referrals. Tech companies heavily incentivize their current staff to recommend friends and former colleagues for open positions, creating a system that overwhelmingly favors people who are already inside the professional bubble. The result is a modern incarnation of the old boys network, where opportunities flow through social and academic connections. Who you know becomes just as important as what you know, ensuring that the industry's demographics constantly self-replicate. If the current workforce is predominantly young, male, and from a certain socioeconomic background, then their referrals will likely look exactly the same, perpetuating a homogeneous culture that can systematically exclude women, older workers, and people from different class or ethnic backgrounds. It's a perfectly efficient engine for preserving the status quo, disguised as a practical hiring shortcut. And then there is the culture itself, the infamous Silicon Valley culture fit. This vague and often unstated criterion might be the most potent guild-like barrier of all. In interviews, candidates are not only tested on their technical prowess, but are also subtly evaluated on whether they share the same hobbies, the same sense of humor, the same cultural references, and the same worldview as their potential colleagues. They need to demonstrate that they'll be a fun addition to the team offsite or a good partner for a late-night coding session. While this sounds harmless, culture fit is often just a polite way of saying people like us. It becomes a tool for weeding out anyone who seems different, who doesn't embody the specific brand of casual intensity that has become the industry norm. This focus on social compatibility creates an invisible caste of those who naturally gel with the established culture and an invisible wall for those who don't, regardless of their talent or work ethic. It ensures that innovation, supposedly the lifeblood of tech, is filtered through a lens of profound cultural conformity. Even the industry's solutions to its talent shortage have a distinctly guild-like flavor. The explosion of coding boot camps and expensive professional certifications is presented as a democratic alternative to a 4-year degree, a fast track into the profession for those without the time or money for university. And for some, they are, but look closer and you see the shadow of the apprenticeship system. These programs require a significant investment of time and money for training that is often narrowly focused on the specific skills currently in vogue. They create a class of workers who are trained for specific tasks, but who may lack the broader foundational knowledge of a computer science graduate, potentially limiting their long-term mobility and making them perpetually dependent on these institutions for the next round of skills updates. They are the journeymen of the digital age, skilled in the tools of the moment but often lacking the path to true mastery and ownership that a more traditional, guild-like education might provide. Finally, we cannot ignore the overwhelming geographical monopoly. Just as a medieval weaver needed to be in Bruges or a glassblower in Venice, a tech professional's ambition is inevitably drawn to the gravitational pull of Silicon Valley, with secondary hubs in places like Seattle and Austin. This concentration of venture capital, talent, and networking opportunities creates a powerful center of gravity that dictates the culture, trends, and opportunities for the entire global industry. While remote work is challenging this model, the highest levels of funding, influence, and career-making connections are still overwhelmingly concentrated in these physical spaces. If you are not in the room where it happens, you are at a permanent disadvantage, echoing the plight of the skilled craftsman who found his talents worthless once he stepped outside his city's walls. The tech industry, for all its disruptive, world-flattening rhetoric, has built one of the most powerful geographical castes in the modern world, proving that even in the cloud, location still matters. Understanding that these deep-seated structures exist is like finally seeing the hidden architecture of our professional world, but awareness alone isn't enough. The real power comes from taking that knowledge and using it to build new pathways, to actively dismantle the barriers that have been standing for centuries. This isn't about assigning blame, it's about taking responsibility for designing a fairer system, one that genuinely rewards talent and effort rather than pedigree and connections. The strategies for change are as multifaceted as the problem itself, requiring action on individual, organizational, and societal levels, each layer reinforcing the other to create meaningful, lasting transformation. On a personal level, every one of us holds the power to challenge these invisible castes in our daily professional lives. This can start with something as simple yet profound as critically examining our own biases during the hiring process. Are we unconsciously favoring a candidate because they graduated from a familiar university or because they share similar hobbies? we can consciously decide to implement blind recruitment practices, removing names, photos, and educational institutions from initial resume reviews to focus purely on skills and experience. Furthermore, individuals with hiring authority can make a concerted effort to look beyond the traditional talent pools, actively seeking out candidates from non-elite schools, career changers with unique perspectives, and those who have built their expertise through alternative routes like online certifications or self-directed learning. It's about shifting our mindset from looking for the right background to searching for the right capabilities and potential. Organizations and companies have an even greater capacity to engineer change from the inside out. A powerful strategy is the implementation of structured, skills-based hiring, which prioritizes demonstrable competencies over prestigious credentials. This involves creating clear, objective criteria for what a role actually requires, and then designing interviews and assessments that test for those specific abilities, rather than relying on gut feeling or cultural fit, a term that often masks bias. Companies can also invest in creating robust, paid apprenticeship and internship programs that are explicitly designed to reach people from underrepresented communities, providing them with the training, experience, and networks they have been historically denied. These programs should be viewed not as charity, but as a strategic investment in diversifying the talent pipeline and accessing a much wider pool of untapped potential. Perhaps one of the most impactful levers for change lies in rethinking how we credential competence altogether. We can champion and legitimize alternative credentialing systems that are more accessible and equitable than the traditional four-year degree. The rise of high-quality, industry-recognized digital badges, nanodegrees, and professional certificates from organizations like Google, IBM, and Microsoft offers a promising path forward. These alternatives are often more affordable, faster to complete, and more directly tied to the specific skills needed in today's job market. Employers can lead this shift by publicly valuing these credentials equally with traditional degrees, thereby breaking the monopoly that elite universities have held over professional legitimacy and creating a more democratic playing field where skill is the true currency. On the broadest scale, systemic change requires policy interventions that address the root causes of these professional divides. Governments can play a crucial role by investing in and subsidizing education and training programs, particularly in underserved communities, ensuring that the cost of gaining skills is not a prohibitive barrier. Strengthening and rigorously enforcing anti-discrimination laws in hiring, promotion, and pay is essential to protect against both overt and unconscious bias. Legislating for greater transparency requiring companies to publish salary bands for roles and report on their diversity hiring metrics can shine a light on inequities and create accountability. These policy tools don't stifle opportunity. They create the framework for a genuinely competitive and fair marketplace where everyone has a chance to prove their worth. By learning from the exclusionary history of the guilds, we can finally choose to build a professional world that lives up to the promise of true meritocracy. Peering into the future of work feels like staring into a swirling fog, where the outlines of what's to come are still shifting and unclear. On one hand, we stand at the brink of a potential great leveling, a moment where the very technologies reshaping our world could finally dismantle the ancient walls of professional exclusion. Artificial intelligence has the power to act as the ultimate unbiased interviewer, assessing candidates based on pure skill and cognitive ability rather than the name of their alma mater. Automation could strip away the mundane, repetitive tasks that have long defined many low-status jobs, forcing us to re-evaluate what truly constitutes valuable work and potentially elevating the roles that require empathy, creativity, and human connection, skills that are not the sole province of any one caste. And the widespread adoption of remote work has already begun to dissolve the geographical monopolies that have dictated opportunity for centuries. A brilliant programmer in rural Nebraska can now contribute to a cutting-edge project for a San Francisco startup without ever having to navigate the impossible cost of living or the insular culture of Silicon Valley. This digital dispersal could finally decouple talent from zip code, creating a truly global and meritocratic marketplace for the first time in history. Yet, for every force that promises to flatten these hierarchies, another seems poised to reinforce them with even greater strength. The same algorithms that could blind the hiring process might also be trained on historical data that is itself riddled with bias, learning to perpetuate the very inequalities we seek to overcome. If an AI system is fed decades of hiring data from a homogeneous industry, it may learn to preference candidates who mirror that past profile, effectively codifying old prejudices into new, seemingly objective code. The rise of automation also carries a grave risk of further polarizing the workforce. While it may elevate some roles, it could also render entire swaths of middle-skilled jobs obsolete, potentially creating a new, desperate underclass of the permanently displaced, left behind by an economic transformation they cannot control. This wouldn't just be an economic shift, it would be the creation of a terrifying new caste defined by technological obsolescence, where your usefulness is determined by a machine's capability. Furthermore, the control over these world-altering technologies, the AI models, the automation platforms, the digital infrastructure of remote work is becoming concentrated in the hands of a staggeringly small number of corporations and individuals. This concentration of power represents the potential for a new guild hall, one that is digital and global but no less exclusive. Those who own and govern these platforms will hold the keys to the kingdom with the ability to set the rules, take a cut of every transaction, and decide which skills are valued and which are rendered worthless. They could create a new professional hierarchy even more rigid than the last, with a tiny technocratic elite at the top, a precarious class of gig workers serving their algorithms in the middle, and a vast excluded population at the bottom. The gig economy, rather than being a liberating force, could harden into a permanent state of digital journeyman status for millions, with no path to mastery or ownership. This leaves us at a critical crossroads, a moment where the future is not predetermined but will be shaped by the choices we make today. The technology itself is neutral, it is a tool, and its impact will be determined by the hands that guide it and the rules we choose to write around it. Will we implement regulations that ensure algorithms are audited for fairness and transparency, preventing them from silently reinforcing old biases? Will we invest in educational systems that prioritize adaptable skills, critical thinking, and lifelong learning, empowering people to navigate multiple career transitions instead of being trapped by a single, obsolete skill set? And perhaps most importantly, will we undergo a cultural shift in how we value different kinds of work? This is the deepest and most challenging change, requiring us to consciously dismantle the centuries-old stigma that places a white-collar manager above a skilled electrician, or a software developer above a compassionate caregiver. The future of our professional world and the invisible castes within it hinges on our collective courage to choose equity over efficiency, inclusion over insulation, and human potential over historical precedent. The guilds of the past built their walls brick by brick. We now have the power to decide if we will finally tear them down for good, or simply watch as they are rebuilt with silicon and code. So as we pull back and look at the entire tapestry we've woven today, from the smoky workshops of medieval Europe to the gleaming glass offices of our modern skylines, one truth becomes inescapably clear. The invisible castes forged by guilds centuries ago were not erased by the rise of capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, or even the digital age. They were simply repurposed, their blueprints adapted to new materials. The master's exclusive workshop became the corner office, the lengthy apprenticeship transformed into the unpaid internship, and the journeyman's uncertain travels evolved into the precarious life of a gig economy worker. These structures have proven to be incredibly resilient, not because they are written into law, but because they are written into our culture, into our unspoken assumptions about who deserves opportunity, which kinds of work are valuable, and who rightfully belongs in positions of power. But this history is not a life sentence. It is an instruction manual. By tracing these patterns back to their source, we gain a powerful new lens through which to view our own professional lives. That feeling of being an outsider, the frustration of a closed door, the sense that some paths are just not for people like you, these are not personal failures. They are often the echoes of a system designed centuries ago to keep certain people in and others out. Recognizing this is the first and most crucial step toward disarming it. When we understand that the game was designed with a particular player in mind, we can stop blaming ourselves for not fitting the mold and start working to redesign the game itself. This isn't a call for a vague hope, but for a conscious and deliberate effort across every level of society. It means advocating for policies that tear down artificial barriers, like banning the question about salary history that perpetuates pay gaps or funding robust apprenticeship programs that offer paid, alternative pathways into skilled trades. It requires companies to move beyond performative diversity statements and implement truly blind hiring practices, skills-based assessments, and mentorship programs that actively sponsor talent from underrepresented groups. And on a personal level, it challenges each of us to examine our own biases, to question why we equate a prestigious degree with competence, or why we feel more comfortable recommending someone who shares our background. It asks us to become architects of access in our own spheres of influence. The most profound change, however, may need to be a shift in our collective consciousness. We must undertake a radical revaluation of work itself, consciously dismantling the centuries-old hierarchy that places the executive above the electrician, the programmer above the caregiver. We must learn to see the profound skill in a welder's steady hand, the critical expertise in a farmer's understanding of the land, and the immense value in the emotional labor of teachers and nurses. This is about more than fair pay. It's about according every profession the genuine respect it deserves, severing the last threads of the guild's snobbery that still cling to our perception of a job well done. The story of the guilds is ultimately a story about power, who gets to control it, and who gets excluded from it. That story is not over. We are writing its next chapter with every hiring decision we make, every policy we support, and every conversation we have about what it means to have a good job and a fulfilling career. The choices we make today will determine whether the invisible castes of the past are finally allowed to fade into history, or whether they are reforged with new technology for a new era. Let's choose to build a professional world that is not a narrow ladder for a select few to climb, but a wide open landscape where diverse talents can flourish. Let's create a future where your potential isn't predetermined by the past, but is limitless. If this journey through the echoes of history has shifted the way you see your own career path, we'd be incredibly grateful if you'd show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement is what allows us to continue digging into these hidden connections between past and present. We're genuinely curious to hear your personal stories in the comments below. Have you encountered invisible barriers in your own professional life or found clever ways to overcome them? Your experiences add a vital, real-world layer to this conversation. For those of you who want to dive even deeper, we've compiled a list of fascinating books and articles linked in the video description. And if this topic has resonated with you, consider looking into organizations in your own community that are working to open doors through mentorship, scholarships, and advocacy for more equitable hiring practices. History shows us that these structures are deeply embedded, but it also shows us that they can change. By sharing knowledge, questioning the status quo, and supporting each other, we can all play a part in building a professional world that truly values potential.